I'm going to try to be as succinct as I can be. This is a video just talking about the different approaches to ESL language instruction. Last week I talked about the traditional grammar approach, translation grammar, and audiolingual and communicative. And I did put communicative, just a part of it, in this handout that I sent you on announcements. And when you click this open, you'll find this long paper. And I've highlighted in yellow everything that I want you to just read and be aware of. I didn't highlight everything, but I would like you to look at the videos giving examples of each of these 5 approaches. And when I finished, I realized there should have been 6 because TPR, which a lot of you know from teaching ESL, I didn't put that in there. And so I had to go click that, and I just added it in another announcement. So now you have 6, or maybe 7 if I count communicative. But I'm just going to briefly talk about each one and what I want you to really do in this. I'm not having you memorize this or anything. I'm not going to give you a test over it. I want you to look at the videos giving examples of people teaching. So briefly, I've talked about the communicative approach last week. Communicative approach was kind of a breakthrough. It broke with the old-fashioned, kind of weird, either we're going to learn the old-fashioned way with translation, or we're going to drill you with audiolingual so we can rapidly make you minimally competent in the language so I can send you as a CIA or a Peace Corps volunteer or something like that. Now, I know Peace Corps has much better language, I assume. I know that Kate's been in that. But these other approaches are the ones you should be looking at. And what I always believe is the eclectic, which is just pick and choose what works best for you. Really at the center of it, after communicative, is Stephen Krashen, who gets a lot of credit, the natural approach. He talks about the monitor model, and I did highlight that on here. Of course, this is not in color, so it's not in yellow. But Krashen has a lot to do with contextual learning, so that what you're learning is not too far ahead of what you're capable of handling. That's the old Vygotsky thing, that you teach something, you make sure you don't add on too much at once, okay? That's why I'm kind of gone through and highlighted this. I don't want to drown you in these documents. I just want you to read through them for general wisdom, let's put it that way. So I highlighted the part in yellow, so you can see on the natural approach, I highlighted most of that. And then there's an example of it down there below on YouTube of the natural approach. I checked most of these. I think all of these links are still good. And I'll talk a little bit next week about how languages are learned, and I'll go back over some of Krashen's work there. The ones that I'm excited about, and TPR is one of them, but most of you know TPR, total physical response, and you can look at that. But I want you to look at the Rassias Method. It was called the Dartmouth Method because John Rassias taught at Dartmouth College, and he basically, his approach was to get everybody up and out of their chairs, and you had to role play and you had to act. He would talk in the target language. He did not speak very much, if at all, in English. So if he's teaching you French, all of his actions and stuff are French, and he has all these expressions, and he gets you to respond to him in French. So those people that don't want to respond, they don't have a choice because it's very high energy. There's a lot of questions asked, a lot of acting. You have to act too. You can't avoid getting involved in the class. So if you're a reticent person who doesn't want to get involved and sit in the back, you won't have a place to sit because you'll have to stand. You'll see him in his example teaching in China. And you can see how he forces the students out, and they really, you know, they have to interact. It gets rather quite funny. I remember his French, I don't have it for you, but his French class, he would actually do Cupid firing an arrow, and then he'd say, "Oh, you're in love," you know. And so people would be laughing. They weren't intimidated because they were laughing so hard. And ironically, that taught them a lot of French. It made the language extremely alive. So I like this method. You cannot teach it unless you have a lot of energy. I think it'd be interesting to teach this way, but I can't imagine doing it more than an hour or two a day without having to take a nap. So that's why I want you to look at this. And there's at the end of Rassias, which I have number 3 on here. Some of these I didn't number because I was putting them together. I like Suggestopedia, which is the next one. Now, normally TPR would be in here, but I'll talk about it last. Suggestopedia used to be, in the old days, some guy in Bulgaria, what's his name, Lazanov, he would have people, beautiful music in the background. He'd read to them in the target language, whatever it was. And so you would just sit there and relax in a big stuffed chair, and he would talk to you in French or Russian or whatever it was. And you would just appreciate the sound like music. If you could imagine, instead of communicating, instead of all this stuff of instantly using the language and you have to know what it is, you just listen to it like music. You just get used to hearing the sounds, because you have to hear the sounds before you can produce them. That's what I like about Suggestopedia. It's a little hypnotic, which sounds strange, but the examples on here, it's been updated. I mean, they don't do like hypnotism and music as much, but the examples, this guy, Lonnie Gold, kind of wild haircut. Now, he's probably, all these people are gone now, but these are from the 70s, these videos. And he would get people involved. He was teaching. One of the lessons you'll see, if you click on these, you'll see one where he's teaching Europeans how Americans greet each other. How are you? How you doing? It's good to meet you. And it's very energetic. And, you know, that's not the European way, but it's the American way. And he's teaching them not only English, but teaching them the culture. And I really like that. It's a little bit like Rassias. See, these things all kind of share common. You know, you want to get the kids to speak, so you want to speak in Spanish. You want to say, ¿Cómo está usted? Yo soy, you know, I am so-and-so. Well, you don't talk that way, you know? I mean, it's like you're all drugged or something. No, you want a teacher to get you up and you got to explain things and you get made fun of a little bit. And that's how, and it's conversational. They do one where they do the old Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. You know, it's an old country song. I'm not a big country guy, although Kenny Rogers used to be with the first edition. So he kind of did rock music before he did country music. And then there's one, I didn't look at it this time, but they're all sitting around reflecting in lounge chairs. Imagine being able to have a language class in your lounge chairs. Just every day would be different. It wouldn't be sitting in a drill and boring. So these guys have very dynamic ways they've enlivened these. Now, the silent way is really interesting. Now, I'm going to give you a little description of the silent way, and it's not a way that many of you would ever teach this way. It originally started, the guy had these Cuisinart or something, rods or little symbols, and it'd be like a little rubber or wooden rod, and it'd be little blocks and things like this. And he'd put them out there, and then the teacher would say, rod. He's teaching the word rod, and they'd all look, and he'd pick up rod, rod. They'd realize, oh, these are all rods. Whatever that is, it's rods. Think of a little child learning, you know, this is a pen. This is a pen. They're different, but they're pens. Now, later you might add, and silent way, the guy would say red, and you'd introduce concept of colors, black and gray and red. And then, so you learn little pieces of language within context. So it's kind of contextual in that way. But the difference is the teacher doesn't speak a lot. The teacher gives clues, and then the students, there's a lot of pressure on the students to imitate. And then the teacher, by either verbal or nonverbal, but a lot of nonverbal, tries to get the students to come up with the language by their deduction. Oh, this is, you said blue for this, and this is something else, but it's also that color, so blue. And then so the students learn. Now, here's a problem with this. You got to have very motivated students. Students are focusing on learning and are very enthusiastic and don't mind silence. In our classrooms, we like to have the teacher talk. The teacher talks, the teacher talks. But in the silent way, you literally want it kind of silent. You want the teachers to organize everything very well, but then the students have to produce the language. You put the burden on the students to produce the language, which seems opposite. You'd think you'd want to have the teacher dominating all the time, like in Rassias Method. But anyhow, I want you to observe these. They're interesting. I think that the silent way has some real potential there. At least you could have lessons where it's kind of like a game of Clue or something. You have to figure out the language. Okay, so I've talked about Suggestopedia and the silent way. And I put down here, they use the silent way. If you go down in the silent way on the very last page in this set, you can watch lessons. And really what I want you to do is watch the videos. I just put the stuff in there because I already had it printed up and I wasn't going to chop it all out and reconstitute it. Now, the physical response is very interesting. Total physical response. That's the one I sent you on the last announcement. And I apologize. I'm sending these on announcements because I don't want to keep adding to the assignment. You have to go back and look it up. So I'll send you something. You get the announcement. Do what that is. That's mainly explanatory stuff. TPR came up in San Jose University in California. James Asher came up with it. He basically, if you watch that video of Asher, he basically said language teaching is nothing but child abuse. At least, he was trying to break away from the stuff that Krashen was also criticizing, the old tapes and audiolingual and translation, all that. And he said that language is, you learn primarily by listening and then by acting. So it's very interesting. And if you want to watch that tape, you can, but I'm not asking you to watch James Asher's full interview. He's big on the left and right side of the brain. Now, I'm not really big on that stuff anymore. I realize that parts of the brain do certain things, but I know that when a person literally has half a brain, their brain can be reprogrammed and still do the functions, okay? I'm not claiming to be a brain expert. I'm related to a kid, my son, who's kind of a brain expert. And, but the point is, I think visually left and right is one way to conceive it, but it's not literally a physical thing in all people. Asher's real point, I put in here, is that language learning is a process of discovery, not of memorizing, studying, cramming, and drilling. Language learning, like all learning, ought to be a natural, pleasant thing. And really, Rassias, the silent way, Suggestopedia, TPR, discovery. People are exploring language. People are not being browbeat. It's the difference between going to water and drinking it and having a hailstorm to get the water. I kind of like that thought. I just made it up. You want your water in a natural, pleasant way. You don't want to be hitting the head with a chunk of ice, which you can later drink once you're conscious again. So you don't want to be beaten over the head with it. So Asher tells you when you hear the words memorize, translate, study, or work, you're not teaching language the natural or correct way. And remember, the natural way was Krashen's approach. So these people all came along at a similar time, and they revolted against the rigidity of language instruction. The fact is that if language instruction is that painful, people won't learn it. Ta-da! Think about this. How many of you from your French, Spanish, German, or what other language you might have studied in high school came away with nothing or almost nothing? You said, oh yeah, that's when we had Taco Tuesdays and we tore up something on a Friday and we had crepes on a Thursday or Bastille Day. Well, we didn't have class on Bastille Day because it's in the summer. But the point is that you didn't learn the language and it didn't become anything. But if you lived for a while in another country, then you picked up the language. You might have been embarrassed and it was tough. Maybe people weren't always friendly about it, but you picked it up and you were able to use it because it was like something you used without thinking about it. You learned the words. And that's how I learned high school Spanish. I learned a lot of my Spanish, and it was taught in a way that somewhat traditional, but we were also had to use it in a communicative way. We had to ask for things, we had to do things, we had to describe things. We didn't just write Spanish and then talk English in class. It was all Spanish. So we lived Spanish in that classroom, and that's why we learned things. Anyhow, that's what I wanted to share with you on this video. I'm going to do another video on those 2 chapters in the textbook, brief videos, But I wanted to go over this language, different ways of learning a language, because it changes everything for English learners when the teachers are willing to help them discover language as opposed to drill and kill them with language. You can't torture people into being fluent. Okay, that's another quote. And I'm willing to take full credit since I just made it up. But that's how I feel about language instruction. If people are sitting there like this and they're going like this, and then you're not getting anywhere. I worry about that with online videos. I mean, come on. Some days if I'm tired or something, I'm not as exciting. I thought, wow, this isn't good. So hope this has been helpful for you, and I'll get this to you. And I got one more videotape, and I'll put up the discussion for next week. Remember, your discussion from last week's due tomorrow night because I was late doing that. And you guys have to assume that I can be slow about things on occasion. Thank you very much. And remember to look at the highlighted stuff on the handouts, but not the TPR because I didn't put highlight on there.